Eitz Chayim. Are you looking for a great plant for your home or garden? Well, we might just have the answer for you at our monthly plant sale. This is Rabbi Shafir Loeb inviting you to join Congregation Eitz Chaim at our monthly plant sale. It is fourth Sunday and the Monday after that, and we are at 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102. It's the front building right there on University Boulevard in Port St. Lucie. Lots of interesting plants. Come and find the one just for you.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 11:07 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast, and you're on Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Loeb for Congregation Eitz Chaim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And welcome to this ending last Friday in Pesach and Passover. So I've got dreams of pasta and bread, after this weekend.
I've got hats off to my old college, Loyola University.
Yeah.
They had, I think it was over 500 people at a Seder dinner.
Wow.
I think it was Tuesday night at Roberts Hall. And then right next door, they had a gigantic meal, a Ramadan meal.
Wow.
And so Loyola, you kind of shaken some things up a little bit in Los Angeles, but a good time was had by all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
no, it's so Ramadan's kind of an interesting holiday. Not that the holiday is interesting. All holidays are interesting, but the Muslim calendar doesn't have a leap year. So it's not connected to the solar year. It's a 12-month lunar calendar. And so every 33 years, it makes a complete cycle.
Wow.
It comes back on the same time. So for example, when I was in Tucson, there was a time when Ramadan overlapped Yom Kippur in the fall. And it's moving its way back in the calendar. And
okay.
It'll get back there again in some number of years.
Wow. It's like a pendulum type thing.
Yeah. So when the Chinese calendar was put together, the Hindu calendar and the Jewish calendar, those were really ancient times when the majority of the population was agrarian, right? So they farmed, they were tied to the land, they were tied to the seasons. And this is one of the interesting intricacies of the celestial calendar, for lack of a better way of putting it, as opposed to the atomic clock in Boulder, right, which just sits there and clicks away. But when you had to be tied to when were the crops going to ripen, when could you harvest, when were the sheep going to give their babies, that calendar became very obvious. And that calendar is tied to the sun. Not surprising, right? It's the rotation around the tilt of the earth and the orbit around the sun that causes the seasons.
So they figured that out thousands of years ago.
Yeah. And they didn't think the earth was flat back then. I'm not sure when the flat earth came in as an idea. Now, admittedly, the Jains say the earth is flat. So that's in their sacred story. But most other stories don't talk about the earth as being flat. And, the Greeks and Romans were able to calculate the circumference of the earth to within a few meters. So that's not somebody who thinks the earth is flat. You don't calculate the circumference of something flat.
Well, you could. It'd just take a while.
I don't even want to think of the trig.
Infinity.
I don't want to think of the trig and analyte needed to do that. And It's funny because my husband and I were talking about sines, cosines, and tangents. It's interesting to be in an engineer's household. Um, yeah.
That's all right. I can't imagine it.
So, and how do they recognize it? Because they saw the tilt of the shadows of a stick in the ground. That's what they used. They measured the differences in the shadow cast by a stick of a known dimension.
Well, and every once in a while you see the shepherds with their sticks, and you can see various shadows on the sticks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were keenly aware, much more of their environment than we are living in our houses with air conditioning and lighting. They had to use natural light. Yeah, there was some oil lamps where you stuck somebody figured out that if you put a string of cotton or linen in oil, it'll burn. And that's wonderful. That was the beginning of lamps. Now, those are menorot, right? Menorahs. Those are lamps. And yeah, so they understood that, but they certainly didn't light up the world to what we've got now under these wonderful fluorescents.
Then
in
we
the
had
studio.
lava lamps in the 60s, man.
Yeah. Yeah. You can see them now in museums. Yes.
Yes.
So they had a keen
Oh.
sense that the seasons were tied to the sun. It wasn't rocket science. You live a few years, you figure it out. Most children figure it out at some point. And however, the easy way to tell time was the moon in the sky, which clearly went through these phases every blooming month. It grew, it was full, it went smaller, and it disappeared for a night. And then it came back again and did the same thing. And so it was very, very easy. And that's why the new moon, the new month, you hear moon and month, right? So the new moon, the new month was always when there was no moon in the sky. That's easy to tell. You can't see it. People argue about which night is the full moon. Is it full? Does it have a sliver off of it? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Those are debates. And I've listened to those over the years because most Jewish holidays fall on the full moon. Why? Because if you're going to have a late event, you want moonlight
The most
to get
light.
the most light to get people home.
Oh, wow.
So it makes so much organic sense. A lot of the things, right? Passover is on the full moon. Sukkot's on the full moon. The holidays tend to happen on the full moons.
That's interesting. I never would have thought of that, but yeah,
it makes
does
sense. Yeah,
sure.
Especially in a place where over the summer it's not going to rain, so you're going to see it real clearly. And yeah, it does make sense
Where there's no light pollution.
So but the lunar month is not 30 days. It's a little shorter. It's 29 days. And if you keep doing that 29 to 30 days, whether it's a short moon or a long moon, that's because it's not exactly a day. It's not that easily counted. So that's why they wouldn't declare the new moon till somebody saw the new moon, the next cycle of the moon starting in the sky. And we have in Talmud a recording of what the questions were. Where in the sky was it? Was it upside? Was it the cup holding? Was the cup over? So they wanted to make sure that somebody just didn't run and say, hey, it's the new moon. They wanted to make sure that what they saw matched what they knew would be the moon in the sky. Could they have walked outside and seen it? Sure. But it's probably easier out away from the city, even back then, to see it. Little too much light pollution in and around the temple itself. And so the Sanhedrin would wait to hear the report. And it had to come from two witnesses that were not related to each other. So it took, some number of hours after sunset for the new moon to be declared. And it wasn't until much, much later. There's arguments in Talmud about this rabbi knows how to calculate it, hasn't been wrong in the last 10 years. And whether or not it's okay to calculate it, or whether you actually have to visually see it and declare it and then send the word out,
So why did the witnesses have to not be related?
because they can't have colluded.
Oh,
So when they're related, they're not an independent witness.
oh, okay. Interesting. Huh.
So each witness would be interrogated, and they also would be asked questions to see whether or not they were knowledgeable enough to have made that report. Right. So it wasn't just something that somebody stuck in their head and said, hey, go over and tell them this. And I'm sure that all kinds of business was connected to when the moon started. Loans, for example, when bills would have to be paid.
This is so common sense.
Of course it is. Of course it is. And we make it like it's some mysterious, it's not, it's just basic human nature, the reality of society, the reality of living in community. It makes sense. And so it grew up that way. And so the Jewish, the Hindu, and the Chinese figured out that they had to, every once in a while, have a leap month, because you can't cut the moon in half and restart it. It's not gonna listen to us. It's up to us to pay attention to it. And so what we do, and we had it this year, we had Adar too. We added an extra month to push Passover back into the spring, so that the barley sprout would be up, so that we knew in 50 days we could harvest the barley harvest.
Wow. Okay.
And that's what the Omer, we're doing something right now called Counting the Omer. And it's a meditative ponder the realities of life, perhaps kind of a Lentish kind of thing of, just be aware of it. Think about the attributes, think about how are you godly, how are you not godly. It's a reflective 50 days, starting from the second day of Passover, from that evening, going until and it ends at the festival of Shavuot, which was sometime in May, June. It's 40 some days from now, because we're in the early digits of counting the Omer. And Omer is like a bushel. It's a unit of wheat or barley. And that's how it got its name, counting the days until you harvest. Makes complete sense. And the holiday Shavuot is noted that it is the one holiday to be celebrated with a loaf of bread that has risen. So it's a very important. Yeah, most of the other times it's flatbread or matzah that's used in with the ritual meal for the Kohanim, for the priests. But for Shavuot, it's a risen barley loaf. So, yeah.
Sorry, I like sourdough French.
Well, it is kind of like a sourdough.
Is it really?
Yeah, well, because you have to leave it out to get again, they didn't have Fleischmann's yeast to make the bread rise in an hour.
Yeah.
You had to leave it out and let the yeast in the air find it and start the fermentation process in the dough. And then you can knead it and punch it down and do all the things that you do to make bread. Thank you to my late brother Jacob for teaching me how to actually make challah. But that's not that my mother didn't do it. She never taught me how to do it. She always did it while I was at school. So that was, and I guess I wasn't paying attention during summer break, being a typical kid. And
hey, why not?
Yeah. So it was just something that magically appeared. And yes. So thank you to Jacob. So I now understand how the bread has to have its time to rise, and it has to have sit time. And it was, my husband and I were remarking, it's been a few years now since I've done much of the challah baking that I used to do. But I can remember when I did that there were pans of dough, because I made like 10 different flavors, because I'm crazy.
Good grief.
I'm over the top on stuff like that. I
Yeah.
don't.
How many people were you feeding?
A lot of people. And we also, people would donate money to the temple for the loaves and things like that.
Oh, okay.
So it was that, but I didn't want the folks who love chocolate to not have their chocolate chip challah. I didn't want the people who loved it plain to not have plain. I didn't want the people who wanted cinnamon to not have the cinnamon. The salted caramel. I mean, I put everything in the challah you can imagine.
Oh, you had salted caramel?
I had salted caramel.
Wow.
I had
that.
cherry inside the challah. I had anything
Mm.
that might be yummy inside, and I tried all. I even did a hot chili one that a few people really liked.
Oh, now that would be cool.
Yeah, so I had all different flavors, and anywhere from 6 to 10 to 12 of them. So I'd have these pots sitting out all over the kitchen with their little wet towels over them, with their Fleischmans doing their little rising thing so that I could bake them, and they'd often be warm as I would just, I just barely get the last ones out of the and I had to mark each one. So each one had to have a different topping. So I knew which one was what. So like the cinnamon one had cinnamon on top, so I could see it, things like that, just to make it easier. Not to mention they were segregated by tray. But we did, I think 3 sets of baking, 2 levels, however
Wow.
many challah that was. So it was a major production, and yeah, it got to be too much. I overdid it, and then it became too much, so we stopped doing it. And there was a question that came up here a moment ago, which was asking about when do you light Yizkor candle? Tonight at sunset is when you would light that. So
And what is that?
Yizkor, there's certain prayers that we say to remember those who've passed.
Oh, okay.
And it's said at Passover, Pesach, the last days. It's said on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur is a Yizkor service. On Sukkot, there's a Yizkor service, and on Shavuot. So 4 times a year, we can say these prayers. They're special community remembrances.
Mhm.
And so we're
That's
into
nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's nice.
that happens. So we'll do a little bit of that.
And that's tonight.
Yeah, some people will do it tonight, some will do it tomorrow, some will do it Sunday.
Okay.
It'll vary. And it's according to how Passover is one of those holidays because of that new moon thing. The time that it would take to get to the far reaching communities that weren't within runner speed of
Sure.
Jerusalem, because what they would do is they would light bonfires. And when people started messing with the bonfires, they started sending runners, and it took a while. And so in the diaspora, an extra day was added to each holiday to make sure you could get the full celebration.
Oh, okay.
So in
That's kinda
Israel,
nice.
Passover is 7 days, whereas here in the US, for some people, it's 8. Some people say that, hey, we're good enough at the calendar now. We know when things are. There's no question when the month starts. It's uniform throughout the world for all Jews. And therefore, we don't need the extra day of the holiday to ensure a full celebration.
Okay, wait a minute. Hanukkah
Hanukkah
Is 8
is
days.
8 days. So
and
what,
Passover's 8 days.
7 or 8, depending
Okay.
on,
But
yeah, Passover is 7 or 8.
what's the number 8?
7 is full.
Okay.
So why is Hanukkah? This is an interesting question. Why is Hanukkah 8 days? Goes along with why Hanukkah can never start on a Tuesday, just as Passover can never start on a Thursday. It's a trick of the calendar to make sure the holidays come out in the right times of year.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. And that's just the way it works. So that's a little piece of trivia. It was interesting, and I'll digress and then I'll come back to the 8 days. But in Tucson, there were a couple of very Orthodox teachers who were, we had this community high school for the Jewish students. And a couple of the teachers were Orthodox in the group, and they came to me to ask me why Hanukkah never starts on a Tuesday, because they didn't understand it. Somebody had come to them with it, and then they asked, and they found out that was true. They didn't know why, and I said, it's because Hanukkah is set on the calendar when you do Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and the calendar just falls. And since you cannot have Yom Kippur on a Thursday, you can't go from the fast into Shabbat.
Sure.
Same
right,
reason why
which makes sense.
Passover can't be. And so the calendar is fixed, jigged, whatever you want to say it, to make sure that never happens. And that is what goes into the calculation of which years are leap years, because they'll look at how the holidays
Wow.
fall and they'll make sure that the leap year doesn't cause a problem.
It's
It's not
incredible.
an easy thing. It's a very complex system. And again, that's true of the Hindu calendar and it's true of the Chinese calendar.
But it's
That's
been
why
the same
Chinese
for
New-
thousands
It's
of
been the
years.
same for thousands of years. And that's why Chinese New Year moves around. That's why Diwali moves around, because it's on that lunar calendar and it jiggles to the solar calendar. That's why-
Wow.
and Easter moves because it's tied back to Passover in its own way. And so why 8 days for Hanukkah? Because the festival of Sukkot is really 7 days. It's not really 8 days. On the 8th day, there's another festival, another major festival that isn't talked about much, called Schminitzer, the 8th day of convocation. And if you really understand Sukkot, Sukkot, the festival of tabernacles, and it's said in Talmud that if you haven't been in Jerusalem during Sukkot, you have not partied.
Oh,
Okay. So when they are required to slaughter and roast 70 oxen every day, and they're doing a water pouring ritual every day, then you get an idea of why this is important. Okay. So what's happening with the water pouring? They are drawing water from Solomon's pools, which is the sweetest water in all of Jerusalem, still is. Incredibly wonderful water to drink. And they would bring it in these big jugs to the temple, and they would pour it and that year's wine into the same basin so that what flowed out of it was drinkable.
wow.
Because that's the piece that most people don't get. You can't drink wine as it's fermented in those days. It was more like a very heavy, thick mead, kind of like the sludge from grape concentrate that you would get. Yeah, who would want to drink that? So it's
Almost
watered.
sounds like a marmalade or something.
Yeah, well, it's watered down to make it into a beverage. So when Jesus is pouring water into the wine, he's making the wine drinkable.
Wow.
Okay,
Okay.
it's not a transformation, it's an infusion of water into the wine mixture so that it can be in fact drunk.
Where the Catholics might say it is a transformation.
I understand, but it's because there's sludge,
Wow.
right? Because the way they
Yeah,
would have
that makes
fermented the
sense.
grapes, they would have stomped them and thrown the mash, the pounded stuff into a container to ferment, and it was that sludge. If you've ever done any kind of intentional or accidental fermentation, you know there's sludge at the bottom. And what we do commercially is that we add water during the process, and then we filter it. But in those days, they didn't do that.
Sure. Yeah. Well,
Right. They just made the sludge. It was fermented. They put water in it. And they drank it because it tasted good and it made them happy. Called the cup of joy. But you had to, and there's again a discussion in Talmud about how many times do you have to cut it with water to make it drinkable. And it is said that somebody who can drink it with less than 4 cuts is a rare person indeed.
Heavy drinker.
Can drink sludge.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't even sound appealing.
No.
And so we have to understand that these things have changed over time. The way that we get wine in a bottle now is very different from the wine in the casks and the containers. And another reason why they would have done that, water is plentiful relatively, and the wine concentrate is not. So you put the concentrate in your container and you mix it with water to drink it.
I remember when I was an altar boy, and our priest had some Manischewitz wine, and he said, "Here, have a sip." And it tastes
cough
like
syrup?
cough syrup. Yes. Oh gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, Manischewitz is,
But it's thick. It's
and that's thin compared to what it used to be.
oh brother.
And that's sickeningly sweet. I don't think that the wines of ancient days were quite that sweet, but Manischewitz is made from the Concord grape, which makes a very sweet wine. And I like a Concord cream, but that's a whole nother story. I actually don't drink any alcohol anymore, but that's by choice. And but yeah,
Less headaches.
a different kind of headaches.
Yeah.
Don't get those hangovers anymore.
Yeah.
And I never got a lot of those, but a few of them were doozies.
Enough to test you.
Yeah, enough to test me.
Yep.
And did more drinking during the military than any other time. Not surprising. What are you going to do at the end of the day? You go to the club and you drink.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a social setup that is conducive to high alcohol ingestion. Long time ago.
Long time ago.
So back to why Hanukkah 8 days, because when they're deciding to celebrate Hanukkah, Hanukkah stands for dedication. And they're rededicating the cleaned out temple after the Greeks and Assyrians are thrown out and the Zeus stuff is removed and all of that. And the temple's rebuilt and rededicated. And so they say it should be 8 days because we should mirror Sukkot and Schminitzer because we could not celebrate that festival, which is when we should have dedicated the temple. The temple wasn't ready yet. And we don't want to wait for next year. We don't want to wait that long and so they decide to overlap it over the Festival of Lights up along the Silk Road that others are celebrating. And they put Hanukkah for its 8 days in that window.
Wow. Okay.
So it's this marriage of the secular or other, the non-Jewish festival of lights of winter coming at the dark time of the year, and Sukkot, and creating a new holiday so that they could and it's a dedication holiday. So 8 days of dedicating and 8 days of eating fried food because it's so yummy. It is yummy. It's just not healthy.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the various calendars because, like, if you talk to the folks across the hall, Christmas for them is Christmas that most Anglos would celebrate. But the gift exchange is on January 10th.
Mm-hmm.
And is that really the real date? It's
there's so many things that go into calendars, and calendars control holidays. And that's why who controlled the calendar was so important. There was a fight in ancient Judea between the Sadducees, the priests of Sadok, of that lineage of Kohanim, and the Pharisees, the rabbis, Leif Roche, to discern, to search out, to find the meaning of which Jesus probably was one. He passes all the tests to be one. That's what the questioning of Jesus is about. And that's why the Pharisees are quiet, because they're satisfied that he's one of them. But there's an argument between them as to how the calendar falls out. We also know that there is a dispute between North and South, between the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judea, about the calendar. And that makes sense when you realize that Israel, the ancient Israel, the kingdom thereof, which is Nazareth and that area, their crops ripen on a different cycle.
Oh,
Because it'd be like us in Georgia.
it's a north-south
It's a
thing.
north-south thing.
Yeah.
In the South, things ripen here in Florida very early. Our winter wheat is early because we don't have the frost. But where they have the frost, it changes the cycle. And so the argument, and we have the Southern tradition of scriptures. That's what survives. It has to do with how Judea and Israel went through some rough times and identity issues. And
Still are.
still are, yeah.
I'm sorry, but
and look at the U.S. We still are not fully united. There's still
exactly
the war between the states going on, and the
no,
way
it's
that
a war between Florida and everybody else.
well, there's that war too. And so yeah, I was listening to you and Stuart on the way in. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's not going to be pretty. Gerrymandering it's an interesting subject. We actually cover it in some of my classes. And this is as good a segue as any to say, if you've got a question for this rabbi, since we're going all over the planet and the calendar, please give a call 772-340-1590. And I'll also say, if you like and enjoy what you're hearing, please consider sponsoring one or more episodes of Ask a Rabbi. You can do that by calling that same number, 772-340-1590, and talking to either Greg or Carol.
You bet.
And yeah, so there's a different, somebody just said, the north-south agricycle. Yeah, that's what's different. And so what we see in the Southern tradition of scriptures is they complain about the Northern Kingdom celebrating the holidays on their own timetable. Duh.
Yeah.
They're going to celebrate the harvest when they harvest.
On their harvest.
And it's different. But to the Southerners, it makes no sense because they've already got what they've got.
Yeah.
And they're coming to market with the harvest. And why aren't the folks in the North doing that? Which also, by the way, sets up the scene for Jesus's overturning of the tables, the markets. Because if you're coming from the Northern Kingdom and you're going to celebrate the festival in Jerusalem, which is part of Judea, then you're going to celebrate on the Judean calendar. You're not going to celebrate it on the Northern calendar because the temple won't be doing anything.
Sure.
And so your crops are not yet ripe. You can't take them to market. Right. So you take money because why schlep stuff, especially when it isn't yet ripe, and carry it all the way to, it's much easier to travel with money. In fact, scripture says, come with money. Don't worry about the tithe. Come with money and buy your offering when you get there. And so that's what people are doing. But just as we can tell if somebody's from Tennessee or Georgia, we all can tell that. Y'all, right? Here in Port St. Lucie, where we have a slightly New Yorkish accent, or Midwest. Mine, I know, is Midwest.
New York.
There you go. We can tell where people are from by their accent.
Sure.
Now, if you're a shopkeeper, Stuart was talking about paying $17 for a hot dog and fries and a drink. And he knows that they charge it because same thing with the vendors in Jerusalem. They know where you're from. They know you're not local. They know you're traveling, probably won't come again next year.
By your accent.
By your accent, and probably also by your clothing. But definitely by your accent. Everybody knows that Jesus is from Galilee as soon as he opens his mouth.
Wow.
Not because of wisdom, but because of the accent. And he sounds Galilean. And that's why they say, does anything good come out of Galilee? It's the same thing as we have north-south, here in Florida, where we look north to see south. Right. It's that battle of north and south, of different cultural, different timetables, different paces, because of how life is in the city versus in the country, etc. And the same is going on in the north and the south. And so Jesus is standing there and he watches the locals get a deal because the shopkeepers know them. And he's going to have to deal with them every week. So they're looking for a bargain.
And he doesn't.
And he doesn't. Right. And so they're going to, if Jesus is paying any attention, he sees that the Galileans coming in are all paying a higher price for the offering. And maybe they're not getting as good an offering for the money they're paying because, they're not local. They don't know.
You can see this tourist coming.
Exactly. And when have merchants not been savvy to that? And, why should the temple be any different from Disney?
That's,
again, it's not, and the shopkeepers are not run by the temple. They're run by themselves. And the powers that be, the Roman occupation, is not going to be unhappy about charging the foreigners a higher price because they get more tax money.
They get their taxes. Yeah.
Right. Because the taxes are based on the sales. And they were collecting sales tax back then. That's not new. And, we see stamp taxes on goods back then. It's not new.
Wow.
Yeah.
I keep coming back to it makes so much sense that they did what they did.
It does. It makes
thousands
complete
of
sense.
years ago.
And you can see where Jesus would become incensed with that because it would feel unfair. Why should he pay more than the local? It makes sense for the local to pay less, but that doesn't mean it makes sense to the person who's being asked to pay the price. And we are hardwired to know what's fair or what feels fair.
Uh-huh.
We get that instinctively. I've got 2 dogs in my house and they get treats, and one eye is on me getting the treat and the other eye is on the other one watching to see what they get, because they want to make sure that it's not that they want the other one to get what they get. They want to make sure they get what the other one got, or, at least that much.
Sure. Yeah, I get it.
And dogs can do that. There's a wonderful video out there, and you're welcome to search for it on YouTube rather. Look for monkeys unequal pay. And they do an experiment where they give one monkey cucumber, which is perfectly fine as a treat, until the other one gets a grape. And then it all breaks out because the grape is not fair to the one who gets the cucumber.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
So a lot of this, when you set it in context, it just makes so much more sense. And of course, if somebody upturns the carts, they're not going to be welcome because they're disrupting the status quo. It's a busy time. Everybody's coming in for the holiday. The holiday, by the way, probably is Sukkot. Why do I say Sukkot? A couple of reasons. One, people are running around with palm branches. That's the ritual item for Sukkot. People run it around the city, and on the last day of Sukkot, the last couple of days, they're saying Hoshana.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. There's a ritual of hitting it, waving it around and hitting it on things. So, yeah.
What we would know as Palm Sunday.
Right. So that really happens in the fall, most likely. And also historically, the festival of Sukkot is the time when all rebellions in Judea start. It's a very nationalistic holiday. There's wine every day. There's food every day. There's a sense of abundance, and there's a sense of let's throw off the occupier, the oppressor.
Ooh.
And so we see every rebellion that happens between shortly before Jesus is born until till the destruction of Judea in 70. Actually, even after that, 110 and 132, Bar Kokhba's rebellion starts on Sukkot. The rebellion of 110, which actually didn't happen in Judea, which happened in the slave communities throughout the Roman Empire, also started on Sukkot.
Wow.
So it's a time when the Romans are going to be very much on alert. They're not stupid either. They can tell a calendar, and they know that this is the festival that leads to rebellions, to insurrections. And so somebody who runs around kicking tables and inciting the rabble is not going to be welcomed.
Yeah. No kidding.
All right. And so it's reasonable that they would want to know who's the person who did that. Right. Because he doesn't get caught in the moment, he gets caught later. And, that has to do with a whole lot of what's going on between Rome and Jesus and Jerusalem and all of that. It's to me, a very fascinating time in Jewish history, the Roman occupation of Judea. And it was actually the topic of my master's. My master's was Rome and Judea through the lens of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lives a little later. He doesn't actually live in that period, but he talks a lot about it. And he's around in the 110 to 132 time frame.
So how long was the Roman occupation?
Until they totally destroyed Judea. I mean, it's wiped off the map by 135, 136 when they take down the Bar Kokhba rebellion.
Like 70 or 80 years?
Yeah, something like that.
Wow.
Little longer than that.
Wow.
It happens creeping. It's not just a takeover. When Mariamne is queen from Hanukkah, from the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, when she is queen, she needs a king. And that consort is Herod.
Oh boy. Okay.
Okay, so he's the general who gets the princess. And at some point she is put under house arrest. And she gives Herod 4 sons, all of which he names Herod, starts his own dynasty. And that's just to help make Christian scriptures so much fun. You can't have to guess which Herod it is.
I was going to say.
Yeah. Thank you, George Foreman.
Junior or junior or
Yeah.
junior.
Yeah. A little earlier. Yeah. And so Herod names all of his 4 sons Herod. You've got Herod Agrippa, Herod Antipas. You can tell them apart by the middle names. It's an interesting time, as the old curse says, may you live in interesting times. It was. So when Herod becomes king, he is rejected by the local Judeans because he's not Judean, he's Idumean. And the Idumeans, not Herod's either parents or grandparents, I'm forgetting which, were forcibly converted by the Hasmoneans. They went through the countryside and did what we know never works, which is become Jewish or die. Forced conversion never works. Right? As we like to say, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Right? And so when you force somebody to convert, and Josephus, the historian, talks about that. He says the Idumeans are known for not really being Jewish. They're Jewish on the surface, and they still practice whatever other traditions they have under the surface. And so when Herod comes and gains power through the marriage to Mariamne, he's rejected. He's not considered really Jewish. And then when he taxes and conscripts, of course, that never goes over well. And so there's great rebellions against him, and he's not able to put that down. And so he asks his good friends, the Romans, to somebody you're saying not the first or last person who married a narcissist, right? Which is that's part of the problem indeed. And so okay, he calls on Rome to come help him to keep the peace, and Rome, of course, is more than willing to, because they're looking for every excuse to interact and take part of and control the politics of the regions. And the deal they've got with all of the little countries, and the countries are very, very tiny throughout the Middle East and Asia in Africa at that time, is if you pay your tribute to Rome for the wonderfulness of being under Pax Romana, then all is well and you can continue to operate semi-independently. But if you can't collect the tax, we'll come in and collect it for you. Okay, so Herod has called on their services, and somebody's got to pay for the horses and their feet and the soldiers and the chariots and all of the accoutrement of war.
As we look at that area of that time, size wise, how large are these regions?
Tiny.
Are they the size of like Massachusetts or Rhode Island?
Yeah,
like
they're in that range.
Okay.
I mean, look at the map and see how big Israel isn't. But it forms a critical land bridge between Asia, Europe, and Africa.
Yeah.
It's a critical land bridge. You can't get to Egypt by land without it. And coming down along the coast is something called the King's Highway. It's still called that. Right. And, somebody here is pointing out before tribes unite, they're even smaller, which is true. It's what in those days, you didn't have a car to drive. So it had to be what you could manage. And that's one of the big things in the story of Esther. How is it that Ahasuerus or Xerxes or whoever he is, the king of Persia, has 127 provinces with 127 languages? And that's not the size of Russia, folks. It goes all the way down to Ethiopia, but it's just that land bridge. And so it's not as big as it sounds, but it's enough that people are insular because that's what's happening. People are hunkering down in their little communities doing their little farming thing.
But it's also understandable that they would have separate language.
Yeah, of course, because look at Okeechobee and Port St. Lucie. There are differences. Even in that short a distance, there's big differences. And they're less now because of TV and cars and interaction than they were. Language was brought home to me really well. I was in Luxembourg at the Goodyear Tech Center that's in Luxembourg. And I have this love for languages, and I was going to be there for a few weeks. And I said, I really would like a little bit of education in Luxembourgish. I want to learn it. I'm coming from German. I know German. I don't think it'd be impossible for me to learn at least some Luxembourgish. And so I'm talking with one of the workers there. And I said, so, Joe has offered to work with me. And the guy looks at me and says, oh, you don't want to talk to Joe. He speaks Fiandish. And Fianden is 20 minutes away. He said, yeah, now.
Oh.
They speak a different Luxembourgish.
Oh, God.
And
okay.
And I saw that when I went out and toured the little Luxembourg's a tiny, tiny country.
Oh, sure.
And we went to these different places. And even with my not skilled in Luxembourgish, because of my German and the trickle of French that I do not know French, but I could hear how much French was in the Luxembourgish and how much German was there.
But you could get by in German. They could understand you in German.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The average Luxembourger speaks German, Luxembourgish, and French. They might even speak Swiss, just because that part of Europe is so intermingled. And they go through, at that time, 8th grade is in German and high school is in French.
Wow.
So the students coming up become proficient in both languages, although those who drop out of school in the lower grades don't get the French. And what is interesting is the people who come from Belgium to get jobs in Luxembourgish, they will not speak German. They'll speak Swiss and French. So there's this really interesting mingling. But yeah, I function perfectly fine. I managed to arrive in Luxembourg without a slip. So I forgot to pack one. So I was running around trying to find the local department store.
Okay.
And I was given directions to it and was able to ask for directions in my Goodyear car to get there in German. So that functioned. Yeah, the woman from Goodyear, Frankfurt, who worked with me, she obviously spoke German, and she and I would speak a little German. And there was one night coming home from dinner where she said to me, the more wine you have, the better your German gets.
The more sloppy you
Yeah.
get.
Well, no, I think the more relaxed I got with speaking is probably much more the key. And that's true, because I was very self-conscious about how my German, was
I get it.
much more colloquial, being my mother's and my German. There weren't, yes, I spoke it in school, and yes, I did this, and yes, I did that, but to a real German, could I pass muster? So I was always self-conscious. The more wine, the less self-conscious. It flowed.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I got a kick out of that comment. I wasn't so drunk that I didn't remember the comment.
Oh my.
Yeah. What can I say? So it is an interesting world that we live in. Language definitely changes. And, we see that in the accents here in the US. Again, they're becoming more homogenous. That's in large part to television and to movies and things that are emulated.
Well, we had speech coaches in both Tucson and San Diego, and they would literally beat the accents out of you. We had a fellow that was from WFAA in Dallas, and Gene had a real Texas twang, and they
wrangled it out of
folks,
him.
the University of Arizona really worked.
They wrangled it out of him
To try, and of course he fell back in it, but still.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. When we had moved from Kansas City, Missouri to,
and you're saying it correctly.
I know,
Missouri. Yeah.
or Missouri, never mind.
Missouri, yes.
And we moved from there to Fontana in California, and a number of people there said, "Oh, you have that Missouri twang," and I lost it, and I picked up diamond. I have the extra syllable in diamond. That's my California accent coming through, and I call that fuzzy stuff in the grocery store pop, and that's my Midwest. Yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah. Somebody here is commenting, the Get Smart series taught Yiddish to Americans, and that's true. Yeah. Oh, the Yiddish isms, and the Yiddishism, the jokes were in there, like the name Schmendrick.
What a show.
Yeah. But the Yiddish humor in it is even over the top.
Yeah. What writing?
They could get that past the censors.
Sure. You bet.
The bride of or Young Frankenstein, when he's talking with what's Madeline? But anyway, language is interesting, and it tells a lot about us, and it's important. It's how we communicate, and we actually judge people by it. So with that, yeah, and the whole Megillah.
In the whole Megillah.
Megillah Gorilla, where do you think his name came from?
That's it.
This has been Rabbi Shafir Loeb for Congregation Eitz Chayim. This is and we are your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. This has been Ask a Rabbi. I'm going to have trouble putting my mouth together and getting the words out in one sentence. So much for English, right?
See you next week.
See you next week when Pesach Passover is done and I can eat bread again. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL Port St. Lucie. Talk of the Treasure Coast, webcaster of the world.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Rocket Mortgage.
I'm Steve Kathan. We're learning more about what House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy said privately to GOP colleagues just after the attack on the Capitol. This is from a call with the House Republican Conference.
I've been very